I'm Terry, and I'm an alcoholic. The first time I spoke those words in public was from a microphone at a Baptist church of which I was pastor. And that was back in 2014. Now, I want to tell you about my story. And if I were to title it, it would be something like How I Lost My Way and Forgot My Soul. Alcoholism made me forget what is most precious in life, made me forget that anything is precious. There's a paragraph in the play Our Town where there's a character called the stage manager, and he says, now there's some things that we all know, but we don't take them out and look at them very often. We all know that something is eternal, and it ain't names, and it ain't houses, and it ain't the earth, and it ain't even the stars, but way down deep in our bones, we all know that something is eternal, and that something has to do with human beings. All the wisest people that have ever lived for 5,000 years have been trying to tell us that very thing, but you'd be surprised how often we're forgetting the fact that there's something eternal about every human being. I forgot about that eternal part. Imagine a bedroom window, blinds pulled, but the first feeble rays of dawn beginning to show through the slats. That's my bedroom. And when I woke, I felt despair. And really, awoke was not a good description if I'd slept at all. Often, I saw every hour on the clock. I was drinking to go to sleep. I was waking up and drinking to try to go back to sleep. So when I woke up and felt that despair, why? I'd curse the dawn. Why? Because I had lived through another night, and I didn't want to do that. I knew I'd be facing another day full of resentments and fear and anger and self-pity. It was a very dark time. But it wasn't always like that. In fact, it wasn't like that for a very long time. I was adopted at birth. I was surrounded by love, stories of my adoption. I knew very little about my birth mother, but I knew she had made an honorable and sacrificial decision, and I loved her for that, and I honored her for that. I had an older brother, Ken, who was born to Bill and Dottie Ellis, and I used to kid him. I said, they had to take you, but they chose me. I had a little sister, Carol, who was adopted later. But then there were Bill and Dottie Ellis, of course, my parents, and they were a poster couple for the greatest generation. Dad was in the Army Air Corps during World War II, and later a flight instructor for the Air Force for many, many years. We had lots of family I grew up with. I got my first theology from my parents, as we all do, really. And I learned about a good and loving and smiling God. And when I went to church, I had the same kind of experience. I enjoyed church, and I loved God. When I was 19, I felt a calling into the ministry. I remember praying, God, I'm willing to do whatever you want me to do, but if there's a part of me that's unwilling, I'm willing for you to make me willing. I just had a deep desire to understand God and love Him and to serve Him in any way that I could. I went to seminary. I earned 2 degrees. I taught. I wrote. Became a pastor of many churches. Where was alcohol in all this? There was no alcohol in all this. It was not an issue. Not because of any religious zeal necessarily, but we just didn't drink. I grew up in Southern Baptist, Lexington, Kentucky. I knew that Jesus turned water into wine. It wasn't grape juice, and it was a lot of wine, but I just didn't drink. I tasted it a few times, but never liked it, just didn't see the point. And so that by the age of 50, the amount of alcohol that I had consumed would not have filled a Dixie cup. So what happened? Well, little by little and suddenly, I got to a point where I just didn't recognize myself. How did it happen? Well, I had some trauma. There were family issues that I was struggling with. There were churches that are churches. They're difficult sometimes. And then my brother Ken was murdered. And that was a very, very difficult time. But more importantly, there was a slow spiritual disconnection. And that spiritual disconnection, that's what happened. But how? How does this take place? There's a researcher and a very gifted healer named Gabor Mate who wrote about this. He wrote, "One consequence of spiritual deprivation is addiction, and not only to drugs. At conferences devoted to science-based addiction medicine, it is more and more common to hear presentations on the spiritual aspect of addictions and their treatment. The object, form, and severity of addictions are shaped by many influences: social, political, economic status, personal and family history, physiological, genetic predispositions. But at the core of all addictions, there lies a spiritual void." And that's an important line. At the core of all addictions, there lies a spiritual void. So how is there a spiritual void in my story and in my life? For I was, as a minister, in a sense, contractually obligated to be spiritual. It was a professional expectation, right? But that's when I started to rely more and more on myself in a way. And I was frustrated. I was hurting, was fearful, angry, resentful, depressed, felt despair, and it was a dangerous place to be. And then I began to drink, just to try to get to sleep, just try to relax. I didn't know I had a monster in my head called alcoholism, but it woke up and it took a hold of me. I had a 2.5-year period of alcoholism, and it was very dark and it was very difficult. I wanted to die. A good friend came to me in 2013, came into my office and he said, "Terry, we need to get you well. I want you to go to a doctor that I choose, and I want you to do what he tells you to do." I went to that doctor and he recommended that I enter treatment for alcoholism. And so I went to a treatment facility and in a sense was kind of dumped there on that threshold. I was confused and I was just completely hopeless. But thank God I listened. I listened to counselors who cared for me. They challenged me. I saw other men and women who came in. Many of them were in much worse shape than I was. And I saw a light begin to come on in their eyes. And I thought, that's what I want. Now, where was God in all this? I never stopped believing in God. My theology was just too deep. I didn't doubt him. But God during that time was a distant bonfire. I could see the light, but I could not feel any warmth. I was alone. I was adrift. And again, I wanted to die. That was what my life was like when I looked out my bedroom window and had no hope. Now, I got reconnected with God. I kind of had what I would call a spiritual awakening. And it occurred for me on a tennis court at the treatment facility about 10 o'clock at night under the stars. And I prayed this prayer: God, I don't know what's left of me. I don't know what's left of my life. I know I don't have any ministry ahead of me, but I need you. And that night, I gave all of myself as I understood me at that time to all of God as I understood him. And a few days later, I just kind of felt a warm breeze from God. It was as if he said, "You're going to be okay." So now, I don't worry as much as I used to. I trust more. I'm willing to let go of more. I let God do what only God can do, and I never should have tried on my own. And there's a line from an old hymn that you'll recognize that means a great deal to me now. "Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." Remember that title I suggested, How I Lost My Way and Forgot My Soul? Well, the real title should be How I Lost My Way and God Restored My Soul. I'm back alive now. I'm back on track to becoming fully alive.